So let's start by creating our development environment. And the first step will be installing Node.js. I recommend you install Node.js to NVM, which is a version manager for Node.js. So if a new version of Node.js came out, we can easily switch to this new one. Or if for some reason we want to come back to an older version, it's also pretty easy. I'll leave the link here in the description so you can check out. And of course, if you prefer, you can also install Node.js directly on your Windows, Mac, or Linux machine. Okay. For this tutorial, I'm gonna use the 18 version, which is actually the current version of Node.js. Okay, so as you can see, I already have Node.js on my machine. I also have another tool which I recommend you to use, which is the Z shell or My Zsh. This is a tool which will help you to bring more style to your command line and also some useful information. For example, here you can see that I am in this folder and I'm using Git and I am in the main branch of my Git. So if I switch to another branch, I will have this information here on my command line interface. So if you want to check out, I will leave the link here in the description as well. It's pretty easy to install and you can also play around with the plugins and there's a lot of options here. Okay, I left my configuration as the default, but if you prefer, you can also play around with this with some custom plugins. So let's start by creating our npm project. So I'm gonna type npm init, and now we have a package.json file, and I'm gonna create two more folders, the source folder and the test folder. So I'm using WebStorm, but you can also use VS Code, for example, if you prefer. And here I'm gonna create two more folders, like I said, the source folder and the test folder. And another dependency that we're gonna use for this project would be TypeScript. So let's start by, let's install TypeScript as well. So npm install as a dependency TypeScript and the types for Node.js. And we can easily start our TypeScript project by typing npx init, npx TypeScript tsc, which is the command line for TypeScript, and init. And now, as you can see, I have a tsconfig.json file. And here are all the configurations or all the options that you have for your TypeScript project. And the first option we're going to change will be the alt dir, which is the directory for our build. So every time that we build our project, our build files will be inside this, let's say, dist folder. Okay. Another option that we're going to change will be the paths. We're going to see in a second what exactly is that, but basically this is a way to map our imports and use our imports in a more cleaner way. Okay, we're going to see what exactly is that, but for now, let's define the paths for the folders we're going to use inside our source folder and also the path for our test folder. Okay, so for that, I'm gonna first use the base URL to define the base folder we're gonna use as a reference. For example, here you can define the source folder as a reference, and now we can map, for example, let's say that we're gonna have domain domain directory, domain folder inside our source. So we can type at domain / all the folders and all the files inside domain, and we're gonna map that to domain slash and also everything. Okay, and we are just typing domain here because it will be inside the source folder, so we don't need to repeat the source folder here. We just need to use it as a reference. Okay, so we can do the same for the other folders we're going to use, and also for our test folder. So here I'm going to use application, infrastructure, the main, and the test. And the test, as we are using the source folder as a reference, we need to come back to one level and use the test. Okay, and here will be main, infrastructure, and application. Okay, and now you might be asking yourself, what exactly is this folders here? And if you remember for our last class, we were talking about the layers of our application, or the layers of the clean architecture. And we talked about the domain layer, the application layer, and the infrastructure layer. And we're going to use a folder for each layer, okay, to make it easier for us. But again, this is not mandatory. You can define your own folder structure for your project. But for this one, we're going to use a domain folder inside the source to define our domain layer. The same for the application and for the infrastructure. And we're going to use a fourth layer, which will be the main layer. And this will be our entry point layer for our application. So here we're going to install the Express, for example, and we're going to start our server, and we're going to see exactly what will be inside the main layer. And the last one will be the test folder. Okay, here will be all the test files and the integration tests and also the unit tests. Okay, and now as we defined these paths here, let's say, let me create this folders here. So we'll have the domain, the infrastructure, and the application, and the main layer. And here inside the main layer, as I said, this will be the entry point of our application. We can define server.ts file. Okay. And here, as we define it here, for example, this paths, instead of using, for example, let's say that we have a use case inside our application domain. Application layer would be like, let's say, the create user use case. Okay, and normally we would come back one level and go to the application, and then use cases, for example, I don't know, and then the create user use case, or whatever file you want to call. However, as we define these paths here, instead of using this reference, come back to these levels using this syntax here, we now just need to use at application, and then the path for our file inside the application folder. So that's why it's better, in my opinion, to use these paths here. Okay. And now, last thing that I'm going to change here will be the root dir, which is basically the root folder where our TypeScript files will be. In our project, we're going to have, I guess that we're going to have more than one, right? So instead of change the root dir, we can change the root dirs here, which is an array of folders, of files. And here we are going to define our source folder and also our test folder. And here we can also define some folders or files we want to exclude or include for our build. And we're gonna use that as well. We don't need to exclude folders, but instead of exclude here, we can just include the source folder as well, and also the test folder. And you might be asking yourself why we're doing this. And basically this is because we're going to create two files for our build, two tsconfig files. The first one will be for the development. So we're gonna use the test folder in our development environment. And also we are gonna create a new tsconfig file for our build. So we can just basically use the same file as reference, but here you can define dash build. And in this file, we can use, let's say, instead of redefining all these configurations here, we can just extend this for our tsconfig file. And here we can just exclude the test folder, and that's because we don't need to build out our test folder for our build. Okay, this is just for the development environment. So now we have two files. The first one will be where we define all the options, and also we include the test folder as well. And in this file we are excluding the test folder, and this will be the tsconfig for our build. Okay, so now we can update our package.json file to, instead of using index.ts, use just main and server.js. And also we can start creating our scripts to build our project, and we're gonna use a build watch for the development environment, and also I start. So for the build, we can use another package called rinref to remove the old build and install a new one. So we can add, or we can install as a dependence, the rinref, and another thing called concurrently. Okay, fine. So here for our build script, you can run rinref on this folder and execute our TypeScript command line using the tsconfig.build-build.json. Remember that we have created this thing here, so we are going to use that to build our project in this build script. And for the build watch, you can actually run npm run build, and then we can use -- watch as an option. Okay, and for the start, we can simply type node gist main server.js. Okay, that's it for now. And another thing that is very important is to use another package, another dependency called module alias. And that's important to build your project using that path that we talked about a few months ago regarding this thing here. So in order to build your project using these paths, we need to use this module alias package, and we need to install it as a production dependence. Okay, pay attention. Do not install this dependence as a dev dependence, because this is going to break your production environment. Okay, so that's it. And here in our entry point file, we need to import this thing here. So we can simply say import module alias / register. Okay, and you can find this information on their GitHub project. Basically, if you search for module alias npm, you will find this repository here. And basically here it says that you have to install it as a production dependence. In order to use, you have to import this thing here, and also we have to define this module aliases in our package.json file. So let's do it right now. So here we can define our underscore module alias, and then we have to define the 4 main folders, or the 4 main layers of our application. Okay, so we're going to use the same configuration that we defined in our TypeScript project. So basically we're going to have a domain, which will be inside, and remember that we're going to look for inside the builds project, so it will be inside this / domain. And the same thing, let me copy this thing here, and here we'll have the same configuration for the application layer, or the application folder, for the infrastructure folder, and also for the main folder. Okay, and now another dependence for our development environment will be the nodemon. So we can start it, and the nodemon, basically it's a package that allows us to listen for our TypeScript folders, and every time that we type something, the nodemon will restart the server. So we can define now another script here called start dev, and then we can basically build. You can use this build watch, and also the nodemon to listen to this to the build folder, and then restart our application. So we can use the concurrently, and we can use this option here, queue others on fail, and then we can run. And this concurrently basically allows us to run 2 npm commands at the same time. Okay, so we are going to run the npm run build watch, this one here, to listen to our TypeScript folders and then build our project. And then we are going to use npm run start to basically start our application. Or even better, we can use npm run dev, and then we can use this start for the production when we deploy this application. And here you can define a dev dependency, and we can use our nodemon. So nodemon, this thing here is to use the legacy mode. This is in the documentation file. In the documentation you can find this information, and then we can type watch, and we can pass the dist directory. Okay, and it's going to watch the files inside the dist folder, and we're going to execute the dist /main/server.js. Okay, remember to use JavaScript extension because we are building our TypeScript files into JavaScript files, okay? So remember to use .gs and our .ts files. Okay, that's it. And now let's work on our test dependencies, okay? So we are going to use jest to run our test, so we can install it by typing npm install jest and also the TypeScript types for jest. And as we did for the TypeScript, where we type it tsc -- init, we can do the same for jest. So we can, however, in order to execute jest, we need to go to the node modules and then jest and then bin and then jest.js, and then we can run. You can use the init option here, and then we have some options here. So the first one, if you want to use jest in our test script, we're going to change that, but for now we can say yes. Would you like to use TypeScript? No, because we don't need to use TypeScript in our configuration file. It's not necessary, but if you want to, you can also choose yes to this option. And here for the test environment, we can use Node. Let's say no for the code coverage. We can also set up this in another step. And here you can use v8. We can say no as well. And now we have this jest.config.js file, where we have exactly like we have for the TypeScript. We now have this file for the jest configuration. And here we can manually configure our, for example, our coverage. Let me see. Here we can define our files that we're going to collect our coverage. For example, we can use all the TypeScript folders inside our source directory. And however, we don't want to test the main layer. And that's because in the main layer, we're just going to compose our object. So we're gonna inject our dependencies inside our controllers, inside our use cases, middlewares, and so on. So we don't need to collect coverage from these files because we're going to use another approach. We're going to use integration tests for that. Okay, so we are going to see how we're going to do that in a second, but for now we can remove the collect coverage from these files inside the main folder. Okay, so here I am collecting all the coverage from all the files inside the source folders, for all the TS files inside the source folder. However, I am removing from the main layer, okay, from the main folder. And that's it for the code, for the collect coverage from. We can also define the directory for that. I guess that it's here. Yeah, one step below. So we can define, let's say, the coverage. And what else? Okay, and also we need to define our module name mapper, okay? Here. And this is important because as we defined that paths in our tsconfig file for the domain, application, infrastructure, and the main layer, we need to tell jest that we are using that that paths, okay? So basically here we can use this sentence at domain, and then everything after the at domain in our imports, we're gonna map to this file here, this path here, source domain, and this thing here basically is the replace, or this is the placeholder for the path after the at domain. Okay, so for example, if we type here, let's say import at domain slash user slash user, let's say our user domain or user model, and then this thing here will be replaced, will replace this $1 here. Okay, so basically this is a placeholder for the file path. So we're gonna do the same for the application, for the infrastructure, for the main layer, and also for the test. Okay. Okay, and if you're still confusing about this, all these folders here, don't worry, you're gonna see that what exactly will be inside of each folder. Okay, but for now, just keep in mind that we're gonna have all these folders inside our source, our source folder. Okay, and now the last step for configuring our jest will be set up the root folder for our test files. So here we can use, inside these roots, we can define basically the test folder. Okay, and this is the folder where all the test files will be. Okay, that's it for now. We can close this one. Let me remove this thing here. And now the last thing, in order to set up the jest using TypeScript, will be install the ts-jest. Let me check if we don't have this thing yet. So basically we need to install this dependency here, ts-jest. And this will basically allow us to write our test inside jest using TypeScript files. Okay, if you go to the jest documentation, and if you go to the, actually we have this option here inside the getting start session. Basically we can see that we have here using TypeScript, and we have two options. The first one will be Babel, using Babel, and the second one will be using ts-jest. Okay, and there's some considerations when using Babel with TypeScript. Basically the ts-jest is now better option to run your tests using TypeScript. Okay, so basically we need to install the ts-jest, and then we can start to create our test files using TypeScript. Okay, so basically that's it. So let's do that. And here, let me see what else we need to do. Okay, and if you go inside the ts-jest, and we have the online documentation here. Let me choose get started. Okay, installation. Okay, so then we just need to install TypeScript, types.jest, and the jest. And here we can start, or we can config our jest by typing this command, or I guess we can manually set up the presets. So basically we can define the preset by choosing this option here inside our jest.config.js. You can see that we have a preset option here, and that's the easiest way to set up your jest project. However, we are going to use this preset for another integration. Okay, we're going to basically use this preset to set up our in-memory MongoDB implementation in order to test the MongoDB queries. Okay, so for now, instead of using the preset, we're going to use this approach here. We're going to import the preset and you're going to apply this transformation here. Okay, so we are using the GS file, so we can just copy here this thing. And here I can copy this transform option. Okay, so now we can close this file, and now we can start creating our test scripts. Okay, so the first one will be jest. We're gonna use this pass with no tests here because I want to test it if it's working right now when we have no tests. We're gonna use this run in band. Basically, this is not gonna execute our tests, multiple tests at the same time. So you're gonna execute one by one, and that's important because as we're gonna use in-memory MongoDB implementation, it's important to isolate our tests. Okay, so for that reason, we're gonna use this option here. And also, let me define this thing here, and to avoid heavy cache problems with our tests. Okay, and now we can define, let's see, a test stage where we are gonna run in our, when we commit some new changes, we're gonna basically compare these changes and run the tests related to these changes. Okay, so we're gonna see how to do that, but for now we can just run npm run test here, and then we can pass this find related tests, and we can define a new command for the CI where we are basically gonna run the coverage to collect the code coverage for our tests. Okay, so that's it for the tests, and now let's install the ESLint. And in order to install the ESLint, let me go to the documentation. So ESLint, then you have a get started here. Basically, we need to run this command. Okay, so here I'm gonna use the last option to enforce code style and also fix the issues. We can use the first one, the import and export. We are using Node.js. We are using TypeScript. We can select just the node here, pressing space. Okay. And here, let me use a popular style guide, and we can use this standard. Okay, let me define a JSON file. And then we have some dependencies here where we can install it right now to work with TypeScript. And now we can see that we have a ESLint.json file here. Okay, and now we can define another script here called lint, where we can execute our ESLint. We can also define some files or some directories that we are going to ignore when running the lint. And basically we can use the same file for our Git. So let me create here a new file .git ignore. Okay, in this file we're gonna tell Git all the things that you don't want to send or push to the repository. Okay, and usually here you can define these files for our VS Code, or in my case that WebStorm is using. If you're using VS Code, I guess that you need to include here the DS store. Okay, also we don't need to push the node modules file, the dist file. Okay, this is our build, and also the coverage directory. Okay, okay, and here in the ESLint we can reuse this file, passing the ignore path, the git ignore file. Okay, and we can pass also the extensions. Basically we're gonna look for TS files. We don't need the TS facts since they were just working with Node. And then we can pass the fix option to actually fix the possible issues that we're gonna have with ESLint. Okay, so that's it about the lint. And now I guess that in the jest.config file I'm gonna include this thing here at the top of this file to tell the ESLint to ignore or to disable the lint in this file. Okay, I know that I am using this .ts extension here. However, this is important basically for my WebStorm. So I can use here, for example, ESLint disable. Okay. And now, in order to force everyone that is working on this project to execute the lint and also execute the tests in every commit, we can use another tool called Husky. And Husky is pretty useful because we can force to, like I said, run the lint and run the tests on every commit, and also we can enforce some commit message. Okay, so we're gonna see how to use, for example, the git conventional message commits. Okay, so basically this is a convention to define the scope and also the message for each commit, okay? And we can enforce this thing here, for example, using Husky, okay? So we can install it by typing this command here. And now we can add a new hook. For example, let me use this thing here. And now if you open your project, you can see that we have .rust folder, and inside that we have this commit message hook. And basically under the hood, Rust is using the Git hooks, okay? So every time that, in this case, every time that we commit something, Git will execute this command here. And basically here we can use, for example, tool, in this case the commitlint, to check if the commit message it's appropriate. Or we can also define another hook. For example, we can type, instead of commit message, you can use npx Husky add we can use a pre-commit hook that is going to run before every commit. So we can type here, for example, npm test. Okay, it's not correct here, so it's Husky. And now we have now the pre-commit hook. And as we had this before, we just updated this thing here. Okay, so basically we have a duplicated code here. And now here, the same way that we had for the commit message, we can run any npm command here, okay? So, however, we still have another tool to collect just the files that are in the stage. For example, we're gonna work with Git. So in order to commit something, we need to add this to the stage. For example, we can type git add and then the source folder, and then we are including in the stage just the server.js, because this is the only folder that we have, only file that we have inside the source folder. So now the next step would be git commit, and then type some message here, and then we're going to commit this server.ts file, okay? So in order to collect just this file here, and let's say run our tests against just these files in the staging area, we need to install another dependency called, let me close this thing here, called lint-staged, okay? And here basically we need to install this thing as a dev dependence. So before, let me reset this thing here. Okay. And now here, as you can see, we need to define inside our package.json the comments that we can run against the staged files. Okay, so for that we can define, let me see here, below the module aliases, And in our case, we're gonna run against the the TypeScript files, 2 comments. Okay, so we can pass an array here, and basically we are gonna run the npm run lint and the npm run test stage. Okay, let me change this to staged. Okay, and now we can change our pre-commit hook to, instead of just run npm tests, we can use this command here. Here, npx lint staged. Okay, and now let's work on our commit message hook. So let's install this commitlint. Okay, and the commitlint is basically a lint for our commit message. So basically, as you can see here, we can find some rules for our commit message, and in our case we're going to use the commit conventional that I just showed before, this thing here. Okay, we're going to talk about that in the next video, but for now let's just install this commitlint. And in our case, I guess that we just need to install, yeah, this thing here, the commitlint CLI and the config conventional. And now we can run this command here to generate the config file, the commitlint just.config.js. And here in this file, I'm gonna include the ESLint disable as well. And now, in order to execute this, the commitlint, we basically need to execute this command here. Okay, so we're gonna include this inside our commit message hook. Basically, we already have this thing here. It's the default example of Husky, so we don't need to change that. I guess that we can also check to see if it's working. So let me include all these files here. Okay, so I'm gonna create my first commit. Let me see, can be initial setup. And as you can see now, I'm running my lint, and then I'm gonna run the test staged. Okay, so, and we have an error here. Let me see, what is this? Okay, that's because I forgot to tell the ESLint my TypeScript project. Okay, and that's important because the ESLint needs to know what is my configuration for TypeScript in order to check the rules. Okay, so here we can use inside, yes, inside the parser options, we need to define the project. Okay, so here we can define the project to use our tsconfig.json, okay? And we are using this file because this is just for the development environment, okay? But remember that for production, we are using the build here, okay? So let me try again. So, okay, so now as you can see, I just commit these changes, and then Husky ran from me the lint command and also the test. Okay. Another thing that I want to mention is that if you are having problems with your colors here, for example, and let's say that you don't have these colors, you don't have the same steps here, and you are using NVM like I'm using here, you might have issues with the NVM and the Husky. So you can see here that in the Husky documentation, actually, you can find some considerations. For example, let me see here. Let's say that we are having these issues here. Sometimes uh, your npm command was not found, or is not found, or any other issue you might having. I recommend you to take a look on this thing here. Okay, so basically you can change this file here, this global file here, and we need to set this thing here, force colors to 1. Okay, so I will leave this link here in the description, so you can take a look in case you are having these issues. Okay, but I recommend you to set up this thing here. Okay, inside, if you don't have this file, we can create this file, and then we can use export force color equals to 1. Okay, and that will fix some issues you might have regarding the NVM and Husky. Okay, so now the last thing that I'm gonna do is on my WebStorm configuration, I can set inside language and JavaScript, code quality tools. I have ESLint here, and here I can use, let's say, this option here. So I'm gonna run the ESLint every time that I save my files. So let me check. So here, for example, okay, I guess that I have another issue here. Let me see, what is this? Okay, I guess that after searching a bit, I found that this issue here that I'm having in my TS or JS files is related to this version of ESLint. So just in case you're using the WebStorm like I'm using, and you're seeing this issue here, you basically need to downgrade to one version. Okay, so basically we can, for example, install the ESLint with a exact version of 8.22.0. Okay, and if you're watching, when you are watching this tutorial, let's say, and you have like the 9 version or 8. 24, 25. You can check if this issue has been solved. And also if you're using the VS Code, you don't need to do this, okay? But this is just for those who are using the WebStorm, okay? So now as you can see, I don't have this error anymore. And if I type, for example, this way, and then if I include too many break lines here, when I save this, it will run the ESLint for me and will fix my file, okay? You can do the same for the VS Code. You can just Google how to do that. It's not so complicated, okay? But for the WebStorm, basically, you can find this option here on the preference, language, code quality, and then ESLint. You can check this box here. Run ESLint fix on save, okay? So now we can start with our MongoDB. For the MongoDB, we're gonna use in-memory implementation, okay? So we're gonna use this, let me close this these tabs here, and we're gonna use this dependence, shelf jest-mongodb. And this is basically a preset to run with jest, okay? And it will basically run MongoDB in memory, okay? So you don't need to have this just to set up a MongoDB server in order to run your tests. And we also don't need to mock our MongoDB. So we are gonna run real MongoDB queries in our tests, and it will improve a lot the quality of our tests, okay? So I'm gonna include this dependence here. And now in my jest file, I just need to include this preset. So okay. And then the next step will be creating this file here, jest-mongodb.config.js. Okay. And here we can define the specification of our MongoDB. So in my case, I'm gonna leave the default default options here. The one thing that we need to pay attention is to the version of MongoDB. Okay, so let me install also the MongoDB. So npm install MongoDB, and you need to use the same version that you are using in the production environment. Okay, and it's very important because we are gonna download the binary version of MongoDB, so it's important to have the same version of production in order to have a more reliable test, okay? And here we have also other options, but like I said, for our case, it's the first one, it's fine. And this is how we can set up our tests, okay? We're gonna see how to do that. But for now, another thing that I want to mention is that this file will create this global config.json, okay? And basically this is a internal file, so we don't need to commit this thing here, so we can include this as well in our git ignore file, okay? Okay, so that's it about the MongoDB. So we just basically need to create this preset in our JS configuration, and then we have installed the MongoDB and the MongoDB in memory implementation. Okay, here, and also we had to downgrade the ESLint. Okay, so, and the last thing, but before, let me commit this thing here. So okay, and now the last dependence, the last test dependence that I'm gonna mention is the super test. Okay, and this thing will be very important to execute the integration tests with our routes. Okay, so we're gonna define, for example, a route for I don't know, create a user, load a user, and so on. And in order to test the main layer that I mentioned, that we're gonna compose this, the use cases, the middlewares, we are gonna inject the dependencies, and we are also gonna use the express inside this layer. And in order to test the express routes, we're gonna use the super test. Okay, and basically this is how it works. We're gonna set up a express application. Okay, and then we're gonna define some routes, and then we're gonna use the super test to execute this route, and then to check if the status codes is the expected, to check if we have an error, and so on. So basically we're gonna use it to run the integration tests against our routes, okay, our express routes. So in order to install it, just need to run this command. And we also need to install the types for this dependence. So npm install types / supertest. Okay, and now let me just check if our JS integration is working. So I'm gonna create a file here like test dot spec.ts. Okay, and here we are gonna have like a describe, like the test, and here we are gonna write our test. So I'm gonna basically create a test to expect true to be true, just for testing purpose, to make sure that our jest environment is working fine. So let me run npm run test here. As you can see, we are now downloading the MongoDB. Okay, and that's it, it's working. So our test is passing. So let me just remove this thing here, and we're gonna start by creating our tests and also creating our use cases, domains, and everything in our next classes. Okay, so let me close these files here, and I can do another comment here. Sure. Super test. So that's it for our npm dependencies. So now in the next class, we're gonna see how to set up Docker and Docker Compose. Okay, and then finally we're gonna start to work on our application by defining the use case, the domains, and also of course the tests for each layer. Okay, so see you in the next one.